Ask any MAGA Republican what they'll do if Donald Trump is convicted in any one of his many, many, many criminal trials, and you'll likely hear the same answer: bullets, bloodshed, and civil war. The idea that Trump-aligned Republicans would grab their guns and rise up against the government isn't some wild conspiracy theory. It's now a mainstream position advocated by some of the biggest voices in the Republican Party.
But when you start telling people that they can't express their participation in this American experience through a vote, then they start looking for other ways. And they're not, the vote is the best way to do it. The other ways are not so good. And I worry if they start to take the vote away, you could see bloodshed in this country.
It's also a big indicator that the right-wing grievance machine is spiraling dangerously out of control. Because just like we saw on January 6th, once you set the MAGA mob to marching, it's really hard to stop them. Especially if you aren't actually trying to stop them. Hey guys, and welcome back to The Third Degree with Max Burns. Yeah, I'm still alive and recovered from my very familiar respiratory virus, so bad news, you're stuck with me for another week. And before we dive into why the right just can't stop calling for civil war, let me thank you again. Not just for sticking with the channel while I was sick, but for all the kind wishes and notes you sent my way. I know people say this a lot, but it was really touching to see all the kindness coming my direction. That's really uncommon in politics, and it genuinely means a lot. Remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel to keep things growing, and consider sharing the video on your social networks. This channel isn't monetized or anything, so it really is your views and shares that makes the whole thing worth it. And I can't thank you enough for spending your time with The Third Degree. All right, let's go down to Georgia and see what the devil scraped up.
And at the end of the day, we've got the legislative authority to call in the Supreme or the state troopers and bring these people in, right? I mean, and now that we've got 19 people who are facing the rest of their life in prison because they spoke out against an election. I mean, you know, I told one senator, I said, listen, we've got to put our heads together and figure this out. We need to be taking action right now, because if we don't, our constituencies are going to be fighting it in the streets. Do you want a civil war? I don't want a civil war. I don't want to have to draw my rifle. I want to make this problem go away.
That's far-right Georgia State Senator Colton Moore, and he couldn't be clearer that even daring to prosecute Donald Trump at all will lead to a violent uprising, one old Colton promises to get his rifle and be part of. And that's not even the wildest part of Colton Moore's violent anti-government fantasy, because old Colton says he's been talking to Georgia State troopers. You know, the police. And Moore is convinced they'd willingly help him break Trump out of jail if it came to that. Now, that's insane even for Colton Moore, because while police officers definitely skew more conservative than the nation as a whole, there's simply no evidence to support any of these imagined conversations he said he had with cops. But Moore's rant does clue you into how Republicans think our country really works. And it isn't just local idiots like Moore urging Republican voters into bloody confrontations with cops. Former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin, who, remember, was once Republicans' vice presidential nominee, also thinks violence is just fine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think those who are conducting this travesty and creating this two-tier system of justice, I want to ask them, what the heck? Do you want us to be in civil war? Because that's what's going to happen. We're not going to keep putting up with this. And Eric, I like that you suggested that we need to get angry. We do need to rise up and take our country back.
These aren't just the idle daydreams of revolution. These are increasingly specific, goading threats from political leaders that millions of conservative Americans trust. And if you think that's all harmless, well, those Americans have a nasty habit of doing what their Republican leaders tell them to do. Look no further than the D.C. federal courts, which are jammed with nearly 1,000 people who heeded Donald Trump's call to rise up on January 6th. That was no harmless fantasy. Even former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee got in on the action, all but urging his audience to prepare for war in one of the most chilling monologues I have ever heard from a politician who also claims to love the United States. Watch this.
The people in power use their police agencies to arrest their opponents for made-up crimes in an attempt to discredit them, bankrupt them, imprison them, exile them, or all of the above. And if you're not paying attention, you may not realize that Joe Biden is using exactly those tactics to make sure that Donald Trump is not his opponent in 2024. Here's the problem. If these tactics end up working to keep Trump from winning or even running in 2024, it is going to be the last American election that will be decided by ballots rather than bullets.
The common denominator here is that none of these Republicans live in the communities likely to be touched by the violence they call for. Mike Huckabee lives in a gated, exclusive community. So does Sarah Palin. They can call for violence all they want from the safety of those mega mansions while the rest of the country burns. The Republican base is so eager to engage in violence because they've been told for years that their country's being stolen by a shadowy cabal of liberals and Donald Trump haters. And even the former president himself can't resist stirring that boiling pot. During an interview with disgraced, fired Fox News creep Tucker Carlson, Trump couldn't help offering a glowing portrait of the January 6th insurrectionists, men and women who violently attacked police and our government in an attempt to overthrow democracy itself.
Do you think we're moving towards civil war?
There's tremendous passion and there's tremendous love. January 6th was a very interesting day because they don't report it properly. People that were in that crowd that day, very small group of people, went down there, and then there are a lot of scenarios that we can talk about. But people in that crowd said it was the most beautiful day they've ever experienced. There was love in that crowd. There was love and unity.
And Trump does say he saw hatred in that crowd, but not for the reasons you might think.
I have never seen such spirit and such passion and such love. And I've also never seen simultaneously and from the same people such hatred of what they've done to our country.
When Trump talks about what they did to our country, he's talking about election officials who committed to carrying out the lawful certification of the 2020 election. In Trump's mind, the anger of the mob isn't only justified, it's something more people should aspire to. Now stop me if you know this already, but Donald Trump isn't a guy for subtlety, so he went a little bit further, hinting to Tucker that if he gave the proper signal, that same MAGA mob would find its way onto the streets again next year, just in time to sow violence and chaos ahead of the 2024 election.
So do you think it's possible that there's open conflict? We seem to be moving towards something.
I don't know, because I don't know what it, I can say this. There's a level of passion that I've never seen. There's a level of hatred that I've never seen, and that's probably a bad combination.
Listen, unlike Elon Musk, I actually do believe in free speech. And of course, Republicans like Trump are free to say the election was stolen. They can even call for a civil war if they want. And boy, do they ever want to. But as our nation further polarizes into extremes that view each other not just as political opponents, but as mortal enemies to democracy itself, it's worth asking whether it's patriotic for Republicans to call for warfare against a country they claim to love. The MAGA base has already proven its willingness to engage in shocking acts of terrorism when called upon by Donald Trump and his allies. We've seen this happen already. There's no reason to assume it couldn't happen again. And that seems to be exactly what lawmakers like Georgia's Marjorie Taylor Greene want, because she's actively blaming Democrats for any violence Republicans cause.
Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene wrote on Twitter today, quote, "We need a national divorce. We need to separate by red states and blue states and shrink the federal government." She also added, "Everyone I talk to says this." Congressman, this is a member of Congress talking about secession, talking about splitting the country in half.
She's talking about a second civil war is what she's, there's not going to be a voluntary secession. The last time this was attempted, we got the Civil War, right? And thank God for a president like Abraham Lincoln at the time.
In the Republican mind, patriotic MAGA voters are being forced into becoming terrorists by Joe Biden. Trust Republicans when they tell you what they plan to do, because the current MAGA ideology doesn't allow for any system that can hold Donald Trump accountable. In their minds, Donald Trump is above the law, and any effort to put him in prison is a direct threat not just to Trump, but to the MAGA movement's twisted vision of America. One thing we do know is that the MAGA movement is clearly capable of sweeping violence conducted in Donald Trump's name. They have plenty of elected officials in Washington willing to cheer them on. The Department of Justice should take that for the clear and present threat that it is. The bottom line is simple. Any belief that puts one man above the law devolves into violence, because when one man stands above the law, the rest of us are below it. And when you've convinced conservatives that the republic itself is at risk, well, that justifies a lot of really extreme, really violent behavior.
So I also, being an equal opportunity rope swinger, I think Nancy Pelosi belongs at the end of a rope. Again, these are not threats because I don't want to get hit with a seditious conspiracy or some other charge. So while you're writing the indictment, FBI, get that straight. I said they deserve it, not that I'm going to do it.
That was the mother of Ashley Babbitt, the MAGA insurrectionist killed by Capitol Police during the January 6th attack. Our government may think of January 6th as a historical event that exists in the past, but these people don't. They are not finished, they have not forgiven, they have not forgotten, and they will get revenge by any means necessary. Don't for a second think that the MAGA movement learned anything from January 6th except to try harder next time. If anything, their radicalization is amplified as more and more extremists go to prison. In the Republican mind, the only legitimate answer left is violence. The only way to fight back against MAGA threats is to stand up to them at the ballot box. The American people still have the power to remind Republicans that we will not be intimidated by a violent and vengeful group of extremists. Our votes remain the only thing standing between our country and a destructive tide of violent authoritarianism. Politicians like to call every election the most important election of our lifetime. Now, that's actually true. Because if the MAGA mob sweeps into power next year, this election may well be our last.
It is going to be the last American election that will be decided by ballots rather than bullets.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. It's great to be back making these after a week of recovery. This was obviously on a much more serious topic than usual, but I think it's absolutely critical that we look at this upcoming election with clear eyes. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and remember to subscribe to the channel to keep us growing. And as always, leave a comment below so you can let me know what I should cover next.